Alana Freeland was trained in Waldorf education in 1977 and spent the 1980s lecturing in order to found Waldorf schools in Washington State. From the 1990s on, she has been writing her own and others' books, lectures, and doing radio interviews. She has written for alternative publications, edited the stories of survivors of MK Ultra and ritual abuse, and ghostwriting books on diverse topics. Her second major in college was biology. In 1996, she was awarded a Master of Arts in Great Books and honors for her thesis on histography at St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Her book, Under the Ionized Sky, has been translated into Serbian and is recommended at a technical university in Serbia, Nikola Tesla's home nation, because to date, it is the only book that explains how Tesla's technology has been weaponized on a planetary scale. Welcome, Elana. Thank you so much for being here with us.
All right. I would like to begin. I want to thank Frank Dauenhauer and Ms. Tech for having me on this illustrious occasion. I have spent the last 10 years really trying to come to terms with the technology that I'm going to discuss today. In part, I mean, there's no way I can in 45 minutes cover what I cover in long books. But this is really the first time I've gone public, other than a small book review an anthroposophist did in London on reading one of the books. But I've been shy because it requires me to really shift into another language, another way of looking at it, another lens. And yet I realize now that I am definitely ready to do that. So let me begin with a beautiful verse that I found in Nicanor Perlis's Humanity's Last Stand, The Challenge of Artificial Intelligence. Beautiful verse from Rudolf Steiner. I want with cosmic spirit to enthuse each human being, that a flame they may become, and fiery will unfold the essence of their being. The other ones, they strive to take from cosmic waters what will extinguish flames and pour paralysis into all inner being. Oh, joy, when a human being's flame is blazing, even when at rest. Oh, bitter pain, when the human thing is put in bonds, when it wants to stir. An individual's destiny is connected to the space-time he or she is born into. If individuals pay attention, they will see extraordinary connections between their life, its themes, and the larger themes playing out in their time. When I was 25, I experienced the etheric Christ right in the middle of a college class. As Stephen Usher, PhD, described in his essay, Keeley Technology and 8 Related Idea Complexes, etheric Christ experiences began in 1933 and continue to this day because Christ is in the earth's etheric. I was in great distress that day, and as Stephen wrote, the experience would give the suffering person a great boost and transformation of perspective. That great boost in my case was the supersensible entry of the Holy Spirit, or Paraclete, who, over the next 19 years, one metonic cycle, undertook a complete overhaul of my soul until the day I finally remembered the childhood events that had caused me to lose contact with my destiny. The memory and my consciousness of its truth returned me to that authentic destiny. My experience of the etheric Christ made me irrevocably aware of my individual connection to the etheric earth and humanity at large. My experience gave me not just a noble ideal, but the reality of my era. Eventually, I found Robert Powell's astrosophy schedule of Christ's descent through the sub-earthly spheres, thus clarifying for me that the second coming was occurring as I committed myself to facing evil and naming it, thus making it conscious, so it could not operate as it normally did in the shadows. It is Robert Powell's schedule that has been my calendar for all these years. He began with the mineral earth, Christ's entry into the mineral earth, or the physical body of the earth, in 1945. Then, following a Jupiter pulse of 12 years, he went on through one level after another until starting with the mineral earth, then going to the fluid earth, 1945 to 1957, air earth, 1957 to 1968, form earth, 1968 to 1980, fruit earth, 1968 to 1992, fire earth, 1992 to 2004, earth mirror manas, 2004 to 2016, to where we are now, earth server Buddhi, 2016 going until 2028. And the final one will be the earth core, or Atma, that will be 2028 to 2040. From 25 years to 45 years of age, I nurtured myself on Waldorf education and Rudolf Steiner's ideas. Hopefully, I contributed to children's lives as they healed my childhood, so I could at last be strengthened by its forces. In the 1990s, I left the Waldorf movement and went to graduate school at St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where the Great Books program filled in the gaps of my knowledge of Western civilization. That was the decade that geophysicist Bernard Eastland's patents were reviving the Strategic Defense Initiative, the SDI, Star Wars program that President Reagan, Vice President George H.W. Bush, and Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney had begun in the 1980s by giving birth to the ionospheric heater with the real acronym, the very cool acronym, HARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, up in Gakona, Alaska, all but in the Arctic Circle. It was while reading Angels Don't Play This Harp by Nick Begich and Gene Manning that I experienced my first phone tap and military helicopter hovering over my house. 20 years and 2 books later, I am now finishing the 3rd book in the trilogy, writing about national security programs in service to a secret space program hidden behind geoengineering and global warming, climate change, carbons. Cover story for over 2 decades has been challenging and surprising to me as a researcher. Thanks to years of reading and studying Rudolf Steiner in translation and to having written my master's thesis on R.G. Collingwood's third thing in his book, The Idea of History, I have been able to ferret out much that is hidden or lied about in the multitude of military industrial intelligence papers, patents, press releases, and articles in open source on the web. As you can imagine, highly classified projects like geoengineering don't have a lot of books one can obtain from libraries. One has to have a thinking trained by the best, namely by Rudolf Steiner. My favorite book was always The Philosophy of Freedom. Geoengineering is basically a means of assault on the Earth's etheric, in which the etheric Christ now dwells. Not surprisingly, it includes an all-out assault on our own human etheric bodies by means of a geoengineered mechanical occultism, synergistically able to weaponize the Earth itself with chemicals, nanotechnology, electromagnetism, pulsed frequencies, GMO foods, vaccinations, synthetic biology, and epigenetics. The assault is thus not entirely material. Technologies like televisions, computers, and cell phones are employed to transmit pulsed frequencies that directly affect our behavior, morals, and ethics, and corporate culture, like big pharma, which is chemical, and the medical industry, which is brain-computer interface. They're all in league with the UN to obtain full spectrum dominance over everything and everyone on planet Earth. And now I'd like to turn you to a PowerPoint presentation and go through some of the points beginning. I will not have time to go through everything. All right. Ahrimans era. Yes, it is. The secret space programs, geoengineered. Let's move on to the 7 geoengineering operational categories are the skeleton by which I proceed to see how all of these things involved in geoengineering without the public's knowledge, how they all interpenetrate. So here we start with weather engineering. I'm often asked, is there any real weather now? And I have to say that the only real weather I am aware of is the weather coming off of the South Pacific Ocean, which is quickly taken up by the geoengineers in the Navy and civilian operations, and is quickly converted into something they can use for power over the Earth. So no, there is no real weather anymore, no nature weather. And I always think of, and here I'd like to, this wonderful book, little old book. Anybody remember this? This is by Dennis Klochek on weather, in which Dennis, many years ago I read this, Dennis says, the forces of the soul life of the Earth consist of its electromagnetic and even more subtle cloud of energies that are around it as a result of the interaction of the Earth with the other cosmic bodies. This cloud of energies is a constantly fluctuating force field which manifests around the Earth's life body as its atmosphere. This force field is stimulated by geometric relationships between the Earth, the planet, and the stars. So I think you can imagine exactly what engineering all the weather means. It is basically, in a way, the emotional feeling life of the Earth. It is all now being engineered. Will this affect us? Of course it will. So coupled with that, and the weather engineering is first because it is the most huge of all the operations, in a sense, in that by ionizing the atmosphere, with and triggering electrical events constantly to ionize more and more via weather engineering, it leads to all the rest. So the second one is chemical electromagnetic operations. That includes all the way from many plasma events are going on, plasma experiments in the atmosphere. There are many electromagnetic operations that you can't see, but are going on. Then next, third operation, planetary geophysical operations. This would include things like the laser triggering of fires in California, what Australia went through recently, where there were fires all the way around. You can, if you're distributing nanoparticles of aluminum, you have very dry air, which of course dryness is essential for all of the communications that the military industrial intelligence complex wants to keep going. You can trigger fires, you can trigger explosions more easily because of the way you're keeping the atmosphere, the dryness of it. So then on to the fourth, the directed energy weapons operations. Those have to do with the usual that you see in science fiction movies, particle beam weapons, lasers, all sorts of things coming from satellites. Now we have the Elon Musk's satellites and others, and he's not the only one, let me tell you, going up into space so that they can connect with cell phones of 5G and do many other operations. The next is surveillance and neural weapons. Of course, that includes, that in a way follows directly from directed energy weapons. And this has to do with mind control, as it's called, and keeping tabs on everyone, on not just their lives, not just getting in their car and going to their home or their job, but also on the genetic level. This, believe it or not, they are able now to read that level. So then the next one is the one I spend most of my time on now, because I'm writing the third and last book in this series, digital biology, nanotechnology, and transhumanism. Both of the first two are heading us toward the last. And I won't have time today to go into that, but you really need to have the understanding of the assault on the Earth's etheric. And finally, the last one, the cloaking and obscuration, and this would be the detection as well of exotic propulsion craft, plus the detection of exotic plasma life forms in our atmosphere. And I won't go into that either, but you can always read the books and see these things. Let's listen to Dietrich Klinghardt. He lives in Seattle, practices there, and he also has a practice in Berlin. And he says something quite wonderful. So we'll take 7 minutes to listen to him.
What do you think is really happening in this world? Like, most conventional people are under the impression that it's, if you have depression or anxiety or some sort of illness, it's either you caught a bacteria or you have neurotransmitter imbalance. What do you feel if you had to take a big step back and see it all? Do you think it's a matter of light versus dark? What's the biggest scope you can say that's happening on the world?
Well, of course, that's I could give many answers to that, but I think light versus dark is the shortest way of expressing it. I in different lectures that I give, so I make it very clear. We don't have to go into the details. In Rudolf Steiner, the Austrian mystic that was very active in the early part of the last century, the founder of Waldorf schools and biodynamic farming and a completely new kind of alternative medicine. He predicted, that towards the end of last century and the beginning of this century, there will be a movement driven by big corporations to take the soul away from people, to disconnect people from the higher world. And in order to do that, we have to destroy the pineal gland in people. And I followed the research on that, and amazingly what we found, the pineal gland is the most sensitive part of our central nervous system and is highly, highly, highly sensitive to 4 things: aluminum, glyphosate, fluoride, and Wi-Fi. And we are the only country in the world that has pushed these 4 things in the last 60 years or so on everybody growing up here. And so what I feel, what I observe, and what we're also testing in our ART system is that people have severely calcified pineal glands. And I show the anatomy in some of my courses. It's very clear that the pineal gland is a receiver for higher fields of energy and translates them into thought and into actually controlling our immune system, our endocrine system, and so on and so forth. There's all science, but very few people pay attention to science anymore, especially since Donald Trump and his disregard for science. It's become the new norm, and so it is astounding that the telecommunications industry has selected the frequencies out of the huge spectrum of frequencies that are absolutely destructive to our cells and especially to the pineal gland. They couldn't have made any better choices than 2.4 gigahertz. That the end point, that when you have inhale aluminum, as we do from the geoengineering program, and have glyphosate in the food chain, that glyphosate and aluminum combine in the blood and in the gut and in the bloodstream to form 6 different chemical compounds where aluminum and glyphosate are hooked up together, and the end point of that compound is the pineal gland. It's published, it's not my idea. And what is needed for this compound to actually enter the brain is to open up the blood-brain barrier, and the current frequencies in the Wi-Fi world are exactly doing that. They open the blood-brain barrier, so toxins that used to stay in the bloodstream and in the body below the neck are now entering the brain very freely. That applies to all toxins, and so it's a new time in that way, And so, when you think this through, you come to the conclusion that either there must have been an ultra intelligence group of scientists who have designed this protocol to fluoridate the drinking water, to put nanonized aluminum in the air, to put glyphosate in the food, and then activate it, spark it with the right frequencies. It took me 20 years to figure out the perfect storm that is created there. And it's either a coincidence, which is possible, that enough dumb people made the wrong choices, along the years. I'm still hoping that may be at least partially true, or it's orchestrated by a very, very intelligent group of destructive minds. Or what I also believe is very possible, that there's some higher fields of consciousness that can be both tuned into the light and to life affirmative action, and can be absolutely destructive, like phenomena like Adolf Hitler and others, people that come under the influence of something absolutely dark and destructive. And I do believe it's very possible that enough scientists and politicians have come under that influence of those higher fields and are acting according to it, actually not knowing on a human level why they're doing what they're doing and what they're doing. A good example is 5G. To put it on posts, along the streets, okay, that's one issue, but putting it on satellite and actually the government approving to put it on satellite, blasting the whole planet with a frequency that has never been checked for safety, for its influence on the insects, on the songbirds, has never been checked for anything, and to approve that is unconceivable to like somebody who's still got a little bit of a brain left, and that politicians in the White House and other countries are conspiring with that can only be explained that their brains have come under the influence of some larger, higher field. There cannot be human in nature, because the human nature is always life affirmative and loving and wanting to live and make the biosphere more friendly to life. And so there is some scary thoughts about that, but I'm still hoping, I'm still putting my weight on, let's hope it's just a coincidence and enough dumb people made enough dumb decisions, and if enough of us wake up and point it out to them, that there can be a reversal. The Wi-Fi can be switched off in a second. We'd be done with that, and glyphosate could be forbidden, tomorrow. It's in the water table for many years, but there could be an end to it. The chemtrail program could be stopped like that. So the good thing is that solutions, positive solutions that are suppressed right now, that are everywhere, could be the norm of tomorrow. Within 24 hours, we could turn the planet from a creature that is threatened on all levels to paradise, virtually within 24 hours. We're still close enough to that.
By Rudolf Steiner in 1924, year before he died, you must consider the whole part played by electricity in nature. Human beings cannot go on developing in the same way in an atmosphere permeated on all sides by electric currents and radiations. It has an influence on the whole development of man. This life of men in the midst of electricity, notably radiant electricity, will presently affect them in such a way that they will no longer be able to understand the news which they receive so rapidly. The effect is to damp down the intelligence. Such effects are already seen today. Even today, you can notice how people understand the things that come to them with far greater difficulty than they did a few decades ago. The secret space program. So this has to do with, at the bottom, you'll see I recognize Joseph P. Farrell and Catherine Austin Fitts. They have talked extensively about the secret space program and what is called the breakaway civilization. These are two concepts that intertwine. It all comes from Catherine's long time study of going through the book. She used to be for those who don't know, the deputy director of HUD back under George H.W. Bush when he was president. And she's an investment analyst now of many, many people. So Catherine discovered that originally it was $21 trillion was missing from the American budget, but now it's much more. So did it go into the secret space program is the question. And the secret space program is basically, to simplify it, Soviet astronomer Nikolai Kardashev, 3 phases of technological achievement for any civilization aspiring to a proper space age. Full spectrum dominance over the planet Earth. That's exactly what we're going through right now. The second phase would be control over one star and its systems. There are several programs that have to do with the sun that people are not aware of, and then certainly have to do with control of the plasma energy of the sun. And then the third is control over one's galaxy and its systems. I maintain that that really is pretty far in the future because it's very difficult to even get through the Van Allen belts to get into our own solar system. But this is basically the secret space program. And geoengineering serves that. Here, the reason the cover looks like that is from Nikola Tesla. I wanted to illuminate the whole Earth. There is enough electricity to become a second sun. Light would appear around the equator as a ring around Saturn. And I do have a video which took too much time for you to see, which indicates that we are forming exactly a ring like Saturn's around our equator, filled with nanoparticles of heavy metals. And it has to do with communications. It has to do with a variety of things. Then we have also regarding the artificial sun. I was surprised. I was on a radio show last week, and the person had not even heard of the fact that now several nations have artificial suns, and they are big, and they are launched, and they are put in the sky, and they're up there. So read up on it. So here, now we begin to look at the etheric, kind of how everything's set up. The troposphere, that's where we live. And then there's the stratosphere, that's where you fly when you go in a jet. And then the mesosphere up to the ionosphere. And beyond the ionosphere, which is the last port of call of our atmosphere, actually, it sort of overlaps into the next, which is the magnetosphere. And you can see how very tiny we are down here at the bottom of this, of what's known as as a well. And this is not a great illustration. I would like a better, but it sort of shows the subtle bodies and around the Earth. Just like we have subtle bodies, we have our etheric body, we have our astral body. And I believe that since the atmosphere is being changed, and actually has been changed, by the use of nanoparticles and electromagnetism, both of which are a charging mechanism to ionize our atmosphere, that you can see that there is another body that I am now saying is developing, or maybe it was always developed, but it now is becoming more obvious, and that is a plasma body. And the plasma body would be another subtle body, in that it's not our physical body, but plasma is the fourth state of matter. It is physical, but rarefied physical. So here is just a good look at the magnetosphere ring, the ionospheric plasma, and the plasmasphere, very important. I mean, if I were to say what the theme of most of the activity in the atmosphere now is, it would have to be the development of plasma and the various ways of using it, all the way from fuel to forming new forms of life. Again, another way of looking at the ionosphere. It has different color formations. We see that in the aurora borealis. But the important part is that the U.S. Air Force admits that the ionosphere is completely controlled. And then we have the magnetosphere, which is the most interesting, because all these little these lines of force that you see coming out of our planet, they're actually coming from the North Pole and the South Pole. These are the lines of force that connect us with our sun. And it appears that every planet in our solar system has these Birkeland currents that connect them with our star as well. So that's the big one. Notice that at the bottom, I say in October 2016, the magnetosphere collapsed and then rebounded, creating a space age record. Well, the magnetosphere can be very influenced by instruments such as CERN, and coupled with the ionospheric heaters of many. We have many now, not just one in Gakona, Alaska. So that's important to understand how the etheric is being manipulated, assaulted, tethered to machines. Of course, all these geoengineering machines are artificial intelligence run. And the magnetosphere is not the same as the Earth's geomagnetic field. Now, the geomagnetic field would be like our acupuncture points and meridians. It's not the circulatory system. It's not the nervous system. It is it's very magnetically sensitive, the acupuncture meridians. And this, if you go to www.worldgrid.net, you will encounter the great work of Bruce Cathy, a New Zealander who was a phenomenal harmonics mathematician. Then there's the famous HAARP, a high frequency active aurora research project. I wanted to read just a little to give you an idea of what that is. It changed everything. It brought back the Strategic Defense Initiative, and which we are under now. So it's jointly managed by the U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy, and DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, in conjunction with the Geophysical Institute of the University of Alaska at Fairbanks, Raytheon Corporation, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman. They all shared the original patents for it, and they still control that and what I call the space fence. Actually, I don't just call it the space fence. Lockheed Martin calls it the space fence, but I extend it to its proper dimensions rather than making it sound like it's just one little installation out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The line between the intelligence community and big defense contractors is simply non-existent. So what was HAARP to do? It was to generate extremely low frequency waves for communicating. It was earth penetrating tomography, being able to look deep into the earth, miles in fact. It was to generate ionospheric lenses made of plasma in the atmosphere to focus large amounts of high frequency energy, in other words, be weaponized. Thus providing a means of triggering ionospheric processes for military purposes, weaponized. It also accomplished electron acceleration for infrared and other optical emissions. It generated geomagnetic field-aligned ionization. It uses oblique heating to produce effects on radio wave propagation. It changes the chemical structure of the upper and lower atmospheres to alter the weather. It affects mental functioning. It impacts human health and other biological systems, needless to say. So just to give you an idea quickly here of, this is Dr. John Hall. He's an osteopathic doctor who was targeted and goes and gives speeches. Here he's talking about how HAARP works to control our consciousness. I don't know if you could, how's the sound on this?
Directed energy weapon will control the world.
That's all right, yeah.
You know, and then Rothschild was famous for saying that thing about banking, which was, I care not who rules a nation, but who controls the money. You know, like it's one of these things. Like if I'm Dr. Evil and I can control how the masses think. I mean, really, Hollywood was that and still is to a certain degree, right? This mass programming tool.
Yeah.
And it's like, my gosh, can you imagine? I control how the masses think. And I'm this little Dr. Evil behind my curtain pulling levers. I mean,
well,
and Michael Persinger did most of the Yelp wave technology research for the Navy. He did it at Laurentian University. And even he said in the late 80s, after inventing what he called his God helmet, And this was basically a helmet. He could put it on you, put you in an isolated room, stimulate the brain, the right parts of the brain with the right frequency of ELF. And these people would either think they were abducted by aliens or think they were personally in the presence of God. That's why they called it the God helmet. But either way, they thought they were not alone in the room, that there was a presence with them. So he titled it the God helmet. He continued experimenting with ELF waves on the brain. And then even he said in the late 80s that he could probably control every mind on the planet using ELF. That's how sensitive the brain is to it. That's why whenever there's an earthquake, you would tend to see a bunch of UFO sightings. And it's not because probably they were really UFOs, but it was the Earth generating ELF waves from the seismic activity that was influencing the people's minds that were in the area where there was a spike in ELF waves. Well, and then there's no, that's why you saw the invention of HAARP,
Right.
High Altitude Auroral Project in Canada. It's an ionospheric heater. Its one function in life is to bombard the ionosphere with radio waves. The ionosphere heats up, forms a buckle, and slams down ELF at the Earth, which can be directed. So they said it was a tool for over-the-horizon radar. It's actually a tool to generate ELF waves, because they have figured out that ELF waves, for one, can't be blocked. There's no way to block them. They go right through the Earth, and that they interact with the human mind. So once they figured that out, then they figured out ways to direct those beams, modulate those beams, and then get the human brain to entrain whatever patterns they needed to entrain to display whatever symptoms. And the way I basically interview and tell people about it is, imagine having a catalog of EEG waveforms, brainwave waveforms that you have. One of them is for, let's say, sadness. One of them's for grief. One of them's for anxiety. One of them's for madness or anger. Well, if I take your EEG and heterodyne it to match one of these, display one of these symptoms, and beam it back at you, your brain will entrain that ELF wave signal, and then slowly your EEG will become that waveform, and then you'll display those symptoms. That's not the same as voice to skull. That's how you control someone, mentally. And have you ever, and one of the other ways I'll put it is, have you ever had one of those days where you're kind of feeling in a blah mood, you're not depressed, you're not down, the sun's out, it's not a sad day, but you're just, you just don't feel like working, you don't feel like doing much of anything. Well, if you talk to everybody around you, have you ever noticed everybody feels that way that day? There's probably.
So I see that my time is up, and I knew this would happen. That's fine. But let's end on this little shot here of our clouds. And as I said before, our weather is being engineered, and therefore the feelings, in a way, of the planet, of nature, are being engineered, and nowhere do we see this more evident. And I live right in Cloud Central here in the Pacific Northwest. Nowhere do we see this more than in the clouds, which are now almost, I would say that you probably are not seeing any real clouds. Maybe there are a few places where there would be a few real clouds, but think about it synergistically. Think how the chemicals being released by the jets, by the drones, by the rockets, aerially, just from the air in itself. And again, we're breathing that, and we get into the biology of that and what the nanotechnology of that, which I won't be doing today. You can see that the clouds are really, really important, because they are not real clouds. They are not the clouds of yesteryear. Let's put it that way. They're clouds, but they're plasma clouds. They're entirely man-made. They are not moisture and particulate clouds. They are dry clouds, because the military C4, command, control, communications, and cyber warfare, requires dryness in the atmosphere for communications, all the different wireless communications that have to go on between space and here, between this place on planet Earth and that place on planet Earth. So you see the dilemma of the etheric. All right, so now let me just say a few words of how to deal with this. there's so much that I am not able to discuss today. But let's start with consciousness, since I'm talking to hopefully some anthroposophists. Who better would understand the role of consciousness in being able to meet the crisis of the age of the machines come too early, which is basically what's going on. Mechanical occultism, yes, in an era in which the dark side, the Ahrimanic, even beyond that, the Azuric devotees have brought something too soon, which ends up being what Rudolf Steiner would agree is evil and is something we must meet. We must be able to meet it. So first would be consciousness, and that consciousness of true thinking, that consciousness of awareness, the consciousness of non-fear. All of this is essential to really being able to stay on the battlefield of the spiritual warfare going on now, to stay on the battlefield and not be distracted by sudden health issues, sudden psychological issues, the targeting that is going on of various individuals coming electromagnetically through the 60 hertz in the walls, through the Internet of Things, the 5G antennas around us, etc. I mean, it all seems too much, doesn't it? But we must begin with consciousness and really making a stand in that, because as you know, thinking is a spiritual activity. The spiritual world draws near. The clearer our concepts are, the more heart-filled they are, and that's what I consider very positive. I have never been stronger than now that I know these things that are going on. So I would like to open the. I'm going to see if I can operate this here. I'd like to leave the screen sharing. And then if there are questions, I believe.
So here's a question. Someone was asking, it was announced that HARP would be closed, and later it was claimed that it was transferring to the University of Alaska. Is that still operating?
That happened in 2013. And the idea was it would transfer to University of Alaska at Fairbanks, and close and be disassembled and all sorts of nonsense. HARP is still a primary weapon system, especially because scalar technology is used. So no, it's up and running. And it doesn't matter who they say is running it. I don't know if anyone's noticed, but our universities have been completely taken over by the military industrial intelligence complex because they have all the money. So no, it's still running.
So there's another question that asked in New England. They've had one of the driest summers. I'll take their word for that because we're over here. Is this drying out related to an attack on the etheric?
Oh, no, I thought I made that quite clear. It's due to the heat and aluminum nanoparticles. I can't stress enough the trillions and trillions and trillions of aluminum nanoparticles being disseminated by jets, drones, and rockets. We are breathing them. They are destroying our health. They're not just in vaccines. They are a daily breathing. And that would be the part where I say there are ways that you can get metal particulates out of your system if you make the effort. And a way to start that is to take a bit of your hair and have it analyzed by someone you trust and see what metals you have in your body that you should be concerned about. Generally, when people have their hair tested, the aluminum is off the charts, and that makes dryness. It's cheap. It has 4 times the surface area of other things that are more expensive, as the military likes to call it, chaff, and it's everywhere. It's destroying the soil. It's destroying crops. It's destroying trees, and it makes the air dry.
Someone had asked what you thought of Dane Wigan in the geoengineering.org, if that was a reliable source of information.
Not to me. I have nothing to do with Dane Wigington.
Okay. All right. So, and I had a question, which was, I know you in your last book you talk about Tesla and the in his inventions that now you say the military is using for geoengineering and all sorts of things. So, essentially, not in a healthy way. If we take Tesla's inventions, what would be a healthy way to be using Tesla's inventions, in your opinion?
Yes, there is a scientist who knows a lot about this, a plasma physicist in Iran, and his name is Kesh. I believe his initials are M.K. Kesh. I think the world of him, though there is a very pronounced disinformation campaign opposing him. He definitely knows that these ionospheric heaters could be used to get rid of radiation, like in the wake of Fukushima. He recommended that. Of course, that's not going to happen in a nation dedicated to weaponizing everything under the sun. So yes, all of this technology could be used for good if it were, I think that where scientists are caught, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, is that the funding for most science now having anything to do with geoengineering, any of the secret space program adjuncts, and that includes bioengineering, that includes genetic engineering. They are subject to the military industrial intelligence complexes and goals. You can't get the money unless you pay the piper. So that's our problem. The technology, as Rudolf Steiner knew, it's yes, we want to head toward the time when our technology is morally connected with us. Yes, like John Worrell Keeley. But we're a long way from that now that this machine age has been plopped in our laps, and artificial intelligence systems are basically turning us into automatons. I don't know if you've looked around lately to see that, Frank, but that is what is happening.
No, I do see it, and of course there's what you bring is something that's essentially all around us, and it's happening on the most part in a way that we don't even see it happening, and so when we don't see something like this happening, it's hard to believe it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to spend the time to really delve into it. And just as the philosophy of freedom points to, which I truthfully consider the most important book of the big three, you have to really get your percepts back, for one thing. Most people don't even look at the sky. Most people just have their noses to the grindstone and keep going. Whereas without percepts, you can't come to good concepts. And I'll repeat the adage that I'm obeying throughout this third book, which is you can't solve a problem with the same kind of thinking that produced it.
When is your third book coming out then?
I think I'll be done with the remaining chapters in another month, and then it'll take probably another 1 to 2 months to do the cover and have it proofread and make the corrections. So this fall.
And what will the book be called?
Good question. I have 3 titles in front of me right here. Basically, geoengineered transhumanism, how the environment has been weaponized by chemicals, electromagnetism, and nanoparticles for synthetic biology. I'm prone to long titles. You'll have to forgive me.
Yeah, your first book was pretty long as well.
It was.
Yeah. So so thank you, Elana, and thank you so much for being here and stepping in when you did. We did hear from Harry Salmon, and that was the timing was my fault. Harry was supposed to be on a certain time, and that's the time that him and I were talking about him being on, and it wasn't the time. It wasn't this time. So it was not Harry's fault. It was definitely mine. Of course, there's a lot of balls in the air for us. So he will be coming on in your spot, which is after the break, and first thing up. So 1:30 Eastern time. Harry will be here now for Elana's book. Down there at the bottom where it says recommended books, you'll find Elana's latest book to purchase, and also at the Rudolf Steiner bookstore there is both her books. Her first one, what was the first one's name again? The
Chemtrails, HARP, and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth.
Yes, the very long title. I think you should go with the long title for the next one too, just to to keep it balanced.